the next key thing is probably for you to create policies. So you need to come to, okay, this is my box, but it doesn't matter. You can use this. So the next key thing is to come to what do you call it? IPv4 policy, right? So this is where you set your policies. Now, that's similar to your access list. So the key thing to do here is to click on new. Now you can put a name. Now, but you have an option to not make that enforced. If you go to system feature visibility, for example, so this is saying allow unnamed policies. So that means that it doesn't require you to name all the policies you're creating. Now, for an enterprise environment, you might want to do that because the name helps you understand what the policy is about. Okay. So now, what we do is we in creating a policy, we have you specify what the incoming interface is and what the outgoing interface is. So that means that our policies are interface based, right? So you need to specify what the interface the traffic should be coming from. So, and it also strengthens, the security on the network, because it then becomes part of what needs to be checked. So if an IP address that is meant to be coming from a particular interface is not coming from that interface, then there's no way it's going to match that particular policy. So thereby giving extra, layer of protection. So you need to be able to specify what the interface is. So if I have a traffic coming from the LAN, going to the internet, let's say 1.1, then I have the source. So I can say 40 Wi-Fi address. Now, if you notice, this was automatically created because I enabled it to create the address on that interface. Then the destination, I can say destination is any because it's going to the internet. Now for schedule, I can define what the schedule is, right? So, but if you notice too, what you could also do is create multiple schedules and then group them together. And I can actually have that applied to a single policy. So I don't need to create multiple policies with different chunks of schedules, right? So if I need an access for when people are at work, so instead of creating a schedule restricting internet access from 8 to 5, I can actually leave out the lunch time. So which might be 1 to 2. So I can create a policy from 8 to 1, then from 2 to 5. I then group that together to be, working hours, for example. So what that means is that that policy will be effective 8 to 1, then 2 to 5, right? So that's very, very important. Then the service. So for the service, you define what the service, is, which is what port you need that then either accept or deny, right? So if you accept, so the key thing is your access list is what you have just done. So you've just replicated what your access list is. But beyond that, now we're able to do much more, right? So we're able to apply security profiles to that policy. So we're saying that, yes, we've allowed this IP to be able to talk to that IP on that particular port. So, but we're not just leaving them and trusting that, yes, everything that is going on, is fine. We're now beginning to do deep inspection into that, applying UTM on that particular traffic. So the key thing is the security profiles. Now, but the security profile is also dependent on the inspection mode. Now we have two modes. There's flow-based. Flow-based means that now, as soon as I receive the first few packets, I need to make a decision if I'm going to allow the communication to continue or I want to drop that traffic. Now, what that does is it makes you able to push more traffic. So it's fast, you can push more data, but it's not as secure because you don't have 100% visibility into that traffic, before you made that decision. So the second key thing is, the second option I have is the proxy based. Now, for the proxy based, what we're doing is we're proxying that traffic. So we're going to collect all the traffic and then apply UTM on the traffic. Now, that is more secure, but it impacts on the performance too, because it's going to take time for you to wait to collect all those information and then before you pass it on. So you decide, what option. Now, before 6.2, what happens is for the old FortiGate, you need to decide upfront if you want to do flow-based or proxy-based. But from 6.2, what we've done is we've made it more granular, more modular, such that you can do it per traffic, per policy. So for each policy, you decide, so that means that you can have a policy that is flow-based and a policy that is proxy-based, which is something that wasn't possible before 6.2, right? So if you also notice, now there are some things you can't do if you are not doing proxy. So if you look at the list I have here, I have a whole lot. So, but the moment you enable flow-based, so the first thing you notice, email is gone, right? So because there's no way you determine without collecting the mail itself. What else is gone? I think the ICAP is gone, which is proxy service itself, the WAF, so, and a few other things, were gone. So there are times also that you want to do something. Now, if you can't see, then you need to go and check if the inspection mode you're using is proxy or flow-based, right? Now, for some of this, though you're seeing them here, now the functionality of the things you could do might not also be as much as when you're in proxy mode. If you're in proxy mode, you probably be able to do much more, especially with web filtering, than when you're doing flow mode. So those things are very, very important. So things like looking for words on the page of the site and all of that, Okay. So another key thing is the inspection, the SSL inspection option. So if you decide to do, so we call it man in the middle, really, because for traffic that are encrypted, HTTPS traffic, now the traffic is encrypted between the browser and the web server, right? So for FortiGate to be able to perform UTM on those traffic, FortiGate will need to terminate the connection on itself, then initiate another connection to that server. So that means that FortiGate needs to be a man in the middle. So in between there is an unencrypted traffic that FortiGate can begin to act on, right? So, but that brings up a new problem. So the problem is that the certificate will now be issued by FortiGate and not the server. So that means that if you're going to Facebook and you're doing SSL inspection, the certificate the user will see is a certificate from Facebook, because now Facebook is doing SSL inspection. All right. Now, because of that issue, you might need to have FortiGate on the network designated as a sub-CA so that it becomes trusted by the users on your domain. Alternatively, you can import the certificate, the FortiGate, the CA certificate for FortiGate on each of the clients, but that is more work and not advisable. So the most advisable thing is to make FortiGate a trusted CA on the domain. Now, I've seen scenarios where users went out to go and buy certificate and all that. Now, because this is not internet facing, this is just for traffic protecting, your network, and we're talking about your domain users. You can actually set up a CA server on Windows on your network and use that to delegate FortiGate as a trusted CA. So you don't really need to spend extra money doing that. Okay. So, and that occurs when you're doing deep inspection. Now, but it's still possible for you to do certificate inspection and not have need to set up a CA that's delegating FortiGate as as a sub CA. So what that means is that you're not decrypting the traffic, but you're looking at the certificate itself. So if we come here, for example, we look at this certificate. So from this certificate, I think one of the things that you could see is is it the subject? So you'll be able to see, okay, this is FortiGate, this is the, what are we looking for? Okay, hold on. Let me go to facebook.com. Okay, so now you see that by looking at this, I can see that this certificate is issued to facebook.com. Then I can now, take this domain to be able to decide if I'm going to be allowing it or what FortiGuard categories, that website is in, whether it's social media, business, or whatever has been up. So I can be able to do some form of web filtering, just looking at the certificate, because yes, I can see what the domain, is from the certificate itself. So that's what you have when you do certificate inspection. So you're just looking at that certificate to be able to determine what the domain is. So from the domain, then you can decide. But the challenge is that usually what people do is you have a whole list of domain, that matches both good ones and not good ones. So certificate inspection is really not as secure as you doing, deep inspection. So you're not relying on the information on the certificate, because anything could be on the certificate itself. Okay. So once you create whatever policy you have, or you need, this IP can talk to that IP, can talk to that server, and you determine, what inspection mode you want, flow-based or proxy-based. Ideally, I will say proxy-based, except if, there's an application that is not working in proxy-based, then you can change to flow-based. Or if you have capacity issue, then you can then begin to look at how to, do that. So the next thing is now NAT. The way we do NAT, so there's this source NAT, right? So users going to the internet, you need to NAT the source IP to a different IP address. So we do that within the policy, right? So within the policy, you specify that you want to do NAT. Now, but if it's traffic within the enterprise itself, you might need to disable that, because you want to see the real IPs. You're not NATing within the enterprise. So, but if you need to NAT between those segments, then you can enable NAT and specify to use the outgoing interface address. So that means that it's going to NAT all the source IP to the IP address of the interface, going out. So that's actually good for internet browsing. Or you could have an IP pool. Now, if you have an IP pool, So you could come and create the pool. So just put the name and put the IP range. So once you put the IP range, so then the options are there. So the overload means that if you have an IP, then it takes the IP, then it starts doing port translation on that particular IP. For one-to-one is going to, for each source, is going to pick one IP from the pool, and all of that. So those are how you do that. Now for app reply, now if you need FortiGate to respond to app for dynamic IPs, then you need to enable this. But usually you may not need to do this because you probably don't want the bad guys to know that those IPs are live on the network. So you don't want FortiGate to respond to app on those IPs. So you can disable app. So, but there are scenarios where you need to enable that, especially if you have a network segment on that outside interface, which is similar to the scenario I have here. So if you have a network segment, there is a /30, and then the public IPs are totally different from that. So, but again, I know for your customer, they have their own IP block. So essentially, all their public, are the same IP. So all the traffic is just routed to them. So that's the key thing about enabling app for virtual IPs or IP pool like this. So that means that if the IP you want to use is not the IP on the interface, then you can create a pool and either put the single IP or put a number of IPs and then reference those IPs from here. So I can select this. So it becomes the IP that the users would be translated to going out to the internet. All right. So, but while on NAT, let me just quickly comment. So the next thing is, so if you need to do static, so let's say you have a web server and you need users to be able to access the web server from the outside. So in that case, you need to do a virtual IP. So we call it VIP. So with the virtual IP, you define, so you put the name, you define what the public IP is that users will be connecting to. So this is more like a destination app. So you define what the public IP user will be connecting to, then you define what the real IP on the server is. Now, there are times you want to do port forwarding, then you can also do that. So for TCP, you can now say, okay, users are connecting to port 1025, but internally is port 25, which is email. So you can do all of that from here. So when you do this, in fact, let's create something. So let's say test VIP, for example. So we can say the public IP is 111. Then the IP on the server is 10.111. Okay, we're not doing port forwarding. So we say okay. So then we have our test VIP here. So that means that on the internet, people will connect to 111, but then that traffic goes to 10.1.1.1. So in creating a policy for access, so if that's a web service, so I'll say my incoming interface will be the one interface, which is the interface facing the internet. And my outgoing interface would be wherever. So let's just say it's on the internet interface. So the source now will be the internet, which could be anything, or I could restrict it to if I know the IP of who needs to connect from the internet. Then instead of addresses, I'm going to go to virtual IPs, right? So which is test VIP. So what will happen there is, now because it's a VIP, when people connect to 111, it translates it to 10.111. So now if I enable NAT, what that means is the user that is connecting from the internet, his own IP will be translated. So but I don't want that to happen. So I'll disable NAT because I want to see the real IP of the guy connecting. So remember, the NAT within the policy itself is source NAT. And because this traffic is coming from the internet, to my network, the source is the IP address on the internet. Then so if it's a web service, for example, I can do WAF. To be able to do WAF, I need to change to proxy mode, for example. then I can enable, WAF. So if you click on this, then you begin to see what the WAF can do. So you begin to look at SSL injection, some of this cross-site scripting. So I can enable, okay, so I can enable this. If I want to block, I can say block, and say, okay, so I can configure the WAF as I want. So, but what now begins to happen is it now begins to apply that profile on the traffic. Though I've allowed the guy to come in, then beyond allowing the guy to come in on ports. Okay, so that means the service. I need to specify the service. So it might be web. Where's my web? Okay, so it might be HTTPS, for example. So for this, or HTTP, anyone. So for this, I'm now applying WAF on that traffic. So if it's HTTPS, I need to now do SSL, deep inspection to be able to, for this WAF to work. You understand? Otherwise, the WAF will not work because the traffic is encrypted from the guy connecting to the server itself. So those are very, very important things. But for FortiGate, one thing with servers is that we can actually create a load balancer. If you have multiple servers behind, you can create a load balancer and then you could have the HTTP connection to the load balancer, then have, the traffic inspected, then, every other thing goes back end from FortiGate to the servers behind. So those are key things that you can do. So login also. Yeah. So you can log all session, if you want to capture packet as well, you can capture packet.